Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Levi. I work here at Jack Straw, managing the artist residency programs, among other duties. I want to start by reminding you that we are meeting on the lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot nations and other Coast Salish peoples, past and present. And everyone here at Jack Straw, the staff, the board, the artists, and I hope all of you, acknowledge that we're living, creating, working, and playing on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle and the Salish Sea. And we honor them and the land itself with deep gratitude. And one resource that I found to be useful is native-land.ca. And wherever you might be out in the world watching this, you can find out whose land you're on and hopefully do something with that knowledge. Really happy to be here. This is the third night in our May reading series. If you missed either of the first two, you can go on our YouTube or Facebook pages and stream the videos. Later in the year, we'll have podcasts that are going to be coming out of this combination of the readings and recorded interviews with the Curator Nisi, which should be great. So just subscribe to the Jack Straw Sound Pages podcast now, and then they'll pop into your pod thingy whenever they're ready. After this, our writers will be going out into the community in various iterations and reading in different combinations at different venues. We've got some great stuff planned. The first thing is actually May 25th, so a week from tomorrow at Folklife at the Center Theater. 5 of our writers will be reading, and it will be an all-prose night. So nothing against poetry, it's just the way it worked out. Also, I discovered that the 5 writers who are reading, if you organize their names alphabetically by first or last name, it works out the same. Yeah, so, and their writing is great too. So, I would like to thank the organizations that make these programs possible: City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, For Culture, Washington State Arts Commission, National Endowment for the Arts, the Rainier Fund, and Arts Fund, and individual contributors. Thank you for giving. Even just whatever you gave at the door is appreciated. If you want to support us through Give Big, or there's another donation link on our website, that's great. Oh, and if you're watching online, you can pick up the book that folks are reading from at Open Books. We'll hopefully be throwing a link in there onto the stream, but if not, just search Open Books Poetry and then search Jack Straw Writers, and you'll find it. With all of that out of the way, thank you so much. I'm so glad that Nisi is back here tonight. I'm actually in the middle of reading their wonderful new book, Kinning, and I highly recommend it to everybody, as well as Everfair, which came before it. And we're so lucky to have you as curator, and thank you for being here to introduce this wonderful group.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Eli. Yeah. Yes, I had to miss the middle of the 3 readings because, well, I'll show this. This is what's left after they did the catheterization of my heart. No blockages, nice clean heart. Yes. So, as I said when I introduced myself at the first reading in this series, the only one that I was able to come to, I became the 2024 Writers Program Curator last fall, and I selected the program's participants from over 100 applicants based on their ability, like I read their stuff, their urgency, like does this really need to get out? And the fact that they had been trying to get their things out into the community, and they needed a little boost. So that's what we were giving them. And then I determined the order of these readings and the order of this magnificent book based on, well, first availability, because not everybody's available every night, right? And I wanted like sort of a balance of genres, and I wanted the pieces to somehow be in conversation with each other. So tonight, as before, we've got one piece of poetry introducing us. I happen to think that poetry is primal, and that is why first, primary and primal. One piece of nonfiction, like, to get us thinking, and two fantastic pieces this time. Two pieces of speculative fiction, because that is where I live, and so that is where I practice writing, and that is who I am most interested in, the work of fantastic and imaginative pieces. So I will say a little bit about the readers that are coming up tonight, and then get out of the way. Jarrett Ziemer is first. Jarrett writes poetry exploring ancestral trauma and using the blending of the natural and the personal in images and elements of all sorts. He also compounds media, like there's this thing that I have seen of his where he's reading poems and narrating films. So it's like, it's not just poetry, it's not just a film, it's like film or poetry or something. Catherine DeNardo is going to do the nonfiction, which will again have a marine concern, which was also true of our first evening's reading. So we're going to hear about a very specific group of orcas, or killer whales, from Catherine, who says that she is a former marine biologist, and she writes on this topic, which she declares nobody can claim not to understand anymore, because it's going to be all laid out. Then we have Stacy Jackson, who flew in from the other Washington. Stacy is here to share with us a sort of a prequel to his science fiction novel about a genetic mutation which grants his hero some very special powers. And I will say, I first encountered Stacy while teaching an online course for the Hurston Wright Foundation. And I'm really, really excited and grateful that he's doing this. And bringing us home, Gabriel Moseley, taking us to another speculative imaginary world with an excerpt from his novel in progress, which, I don't know, are we calling this sporecore or mycopunk? Something like that. All of the above. Fungi from space. But with a very subtle twist. So that's what we've got lined up for you, and give them all a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Nisi, for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jack Straw. I think all of us fellows can agree that this is pretty amazing opportunity. So you said poetry is primal. I wasn't sure what I was going to read first, but I think this is a primal poetry poem, so we'll go with that. This is called Feet to Lips. They started with the lips. No, the teeth, the two, the gap. Dug bone finger between the lips. Pride as Alabama daylight. No, wait. They started with the feet. Removed the worn shoes. The stinking socks. No inch was safe. They scrubbed soot toes. Jammed fingers between ash toes, rubbing up leg. They gripped dry appendages, tight, tight to thin skin, stretching thighs, squeezed tightly to skin, so dry and cracking as paper after bark, as paper, as brown, thin paper, stretched beneath water to its pulp, its breaking point. And didn't each hair on the body then darker than the air at night, blacker than the air at night to child after meeting monster's breath, fingers around thighs, shrivel as fuzz from paper to be plucked, sheared from parchment by delicate suing hand. Aren't we taught to be scared of monsters? My ancestors was a white man, nearly half of me outside their window. Mine is a man outside my window, a plain old white man cloaked, the charred body of a Negro hanging as Christ on cross above hands that would soon move beyond, castrated with distinct care testicles to belly swollen from hunger, longing for nectar that tastes only like freedom. That word that has become so simple as to have become unpublishable. And haven't we been taught to live in two places at once? The I am sorry for that man, and I am angry for this one. They are the same man. And can we not be taught to move beyond like hands, cupping a brown boy's breast, texting flex? You will be a footballer. You will be a great debater. You will be a grave digger. You are all something. Are you a house, a field, or a water nigger? They tell me we are all something. Am I a house, a field, or a water nigger? And then there's the neck. Does it snap? Do you struggle now for breath? Do not forget with these words you have breath. My wife is here. She really wanted to come to this, and I'm almost more nervous when people that I know are here. But thank you for coming. So this is a poem for her. I have a couple poems for her tonight. Lately, I'm afraid that my wife will die before me. That is as plainly as I can put it. Or as a poet, I might say that if I purse my eyes too tight, complicated shut before I open them, the dark will fly into her as a pigeon out of coop. I have to tell you, that thought has been looping in my head, falling down the dirt face of me like it's the cheap fence around our small yard that last week lowered itself to our puppy, who, becoming coyote, devoured her youth within our neighbor's last chicken. Had she murdered the first? The man came to me with a howling, and now my dog comes to curl as death at my feet. And you know my grandfather would have shot her between the eyes, buried her sweet body in our pasture, grown July hay from her weeping marrow. Why does everything end in death? My grandfather now is in death. And now, when death tastes your blood, my wife, that he is gone, who will put it down? I never had the heart for those things, so I hold on close to the bits of you and your heart. It's all I can do. Our communication so quiet in the morning. Your sunflower butter kisses before you leave for work. The stove, the burned egg yolk, the hot burner, the way you stomp softly through this cold house. The car warming as you sip your tea. You have quit coffee. We are blessed. We are carrying this new baby into the world. Death curled at my feet below desk. I have to tell you, this thought has been looping. I think we'll do one more for you. This is titled Remora. There's a lot of scientists in here, a lot of people smarter than me, so I'm sorry if I got anything wrong. It's a poem. All right. What are those little fish called? The snippets that become themselves, chumming around the humpback beautiful whales. In front of me, my wife is standing, facing our smeared wet mirror. She rolls brush so gently over her teeth. I lower my cheek into the soft back of her, clamp my eyes shut. I can picture them in this head as a dream, the fish, they glide suctioning from fin to tooth. Maybe they suck at aging dead skin. Maybe they skim absent rotting flesh of the last meal from sea swine's silver slivers of baleen into their tiny silver mouths. Maybe they're just anchoring themselves to something big and beautiful and gently moving in pillowy sea when they are feeling small and so tired of swimming alone. My wife giggles in her sleep. Lying in bed later, I feel her roll her glorious pregnant body away from me. I lower my cheek into the soft of her back. I want so badly to become small. All right, I have one more for you, and we'll get through it together. How much time do I have? We're good? Great, okay. Did anyone go to AWP? Anyone here? A few. Jericho Brown had an amazing commencement speech, and in the speech near the end, he said he was a teacher, and he gave us instructions to write a poem. And he said to write a poem about the changes that you would like to see in the world. Or he said if you couldn't do that, write the poem that was stopping you from writing that. And this is that poem. I don't think I deserve to be happy. Most days, I feel like I'm not the best person. My friends, my wife, of course, disagree with me. Did you know I have this attraction to every woman I have ever met? I don't want them, mind you. I just want to love them. And really that just means I want them to be my mother and put down the scissors, the cutting, the syrup. I want to see beautiful things in them. I want to again see purple. Did you know I want to be every man? Jaw clenched as Jericho walls, brown muscles rippling. I want to be seen and to never be seen. I want my poetry to sing to the stars so well they fall to the earth. I want to become as one of them, again so far away and shining before the fall. And then I want to be like J.D. Salinger, not a star, just bright in the darkness and maybe hiding. And I want to be such a good writer, a poet. It hurts. It really hurts. Is that okay? Not good, not great, not beautiful. You see, I just want to be read, even if by one person. And then I want them to weep because the daisy in my poem reminds them that their mother was once a beautiful flower their father loved only in a field full of others. And then I want them to heal. My mother is a beautiful flower. And then I want to tell people Holden Caulfield doesn't have the answers and to get off my lawn. I want to make so much money I can afford a lawn. It's an embarrassment, badly. I just want to be comfortable. And someone, Jericho, recently asked me to maybe want the world to be happy, to see words with blinding pen, this happiness into the world. To offer a poem that looks like this, to imagine a world where everyone dies from sickness of old age, graying hair, wrapping body into ether. But how can I see a world where everyone dies from old age if I simultaneously believe I should have already died 5 times today and will never die of old age? You see, how could I ever think this world deserves to be happy if I don't think I deserve to be happy? If I don't believe I even know what real happiness is? I imagine if I knew what it was, I'd want for everyone to have it. Wanting is something I'm good at. It's an embarrassment. But most days, I don't know what this is, happiness. And the days I do feel close for a brief moment, don't I release some kind of sopping shit from my mouth that has me again thinking I'm lost as Daisy in a field of poppy. I'm high when they rub against me, the poppies. I'm trying to stay high. Doesn't it hurt to feel? Why, when I'm nervous, do I turn my words into these little self-centered sentences that make people uncomfortable? By people, I mean me. My words make me uncomfortable. Are these words making you uncomfortable? Do not let them distract you from the fact that I strangle, hold, stabbing bear knife in my left clenched fist. It's been gripping so tight as to have become gnarled. I am bare. She calls me bare. She calls me bare, and my paw has curled into claw, curved inward, so gnarly. I do not think I deserve to be happy. I am a poet. Let me say that in a more beautiful way. I will light myself on fire with this paper on this stage if it means you will see me. These weakening bones ripped through this body, these bones turned over from the heat into ashes. And the world does deserve to be happy, doesn't it? I too can want this. All right, thank you.
So I also kind of wrote this piece for someone in the audience, or at least it was inspired by a lot of interesting conversations and work by a dear friend and a science colleague called Scott, who's here listening tonight. When Scott Veers can't sleep, he listens for whales. In the dark, in his sweatpants, slippers, and headphones, he sits at the desk of his home office in the Ravenna neighborhood of Seattle and tunes in to the live audio stream from a hydrophone anchored to the rocks like kelp on the west side of San Juan Island. Scott is an oceanographer and an acoustician. He hears the low throb of propellers chugging up Harrow Strait. He hears the snapping claws of crustaceans. He hears the static of wind and rain. If he's lucky, he hears the muted trumpet of a humpback whale. Or if it's early summer, maybe the bark of a harbor seal. If he's really lucky, he hears killer whales. The southern residents are a small, endangered community of killer whales. They live in the coastal waters of Washington State and British Columbia. There are 3 pods, J-pod, K-pod, and L-pod, only 74 animals in all. They depend on wild Chinook salmon, yet wild Chinook salmon is scarce. Killer whales use echolocation to see what's around them. They shine a beam of sound to visualize the topography of the seafloor, schools of fish, boats, nets, other marine mammals. Echolocation clicks are repetitive, monotonous, and practical sounding. They kind of sound like a sewing machine running a seam, a metronome finding its rhythm, a telegraph tapping out a message. Killer whale calls, on the other hand, are what the whales use to communicate. They sound like conversation, like laughter, banter, Marco, Polo, a yodel, yoo-hoo, cheerio, what you doing, where you going? Some calls sound like squeaky shoes or a clown bending balloons. Others like blowing bubbles, blowing raspberries, or blowing noses, the kinds of sounds that would make a classroom of children giggle. It's thrilling to listen to killer whale calls. It's like eavesdropping. Even if we don't know what they're saying, we know they're talking to each other. They're chatty. A spectrogram is a graph that describes killer whale vocalizations. Just as music notation describes Beethoven's ninth, so a spectrogram describes JPod's S1 call. The lines, dots, and dashes on the spectrogram spell out tempo, staccato, sostenuto, prestissimo, as well as pitch. Some calls are broad spectrum. Many frequencies register all at once, and the spectrogram is packed with jagged lines of data. Other calls register just a few frequencies, more like an operatic aria. The calls are short melodies divided up into harmonics. They sound like a minor third, a perfect fourth, an augmented fifth. These calls make up the whale's language. The southern residents have their own language that's different from the language of other killer whales. J, K, and L pod share some calls, but they also have their own characteristic calls, so much so that they can identify their pod by sound, so much so that you could identify the pod by sound. These calls endure over time, over decades, and are passed down from generation to generation. JPod's S1 call sounds the same now as it did in recordings from 1960. One southern resident whale who was captured as a calf off Whidbey Island in 1976, she spent her life in captivity in Miami and continued to make the southern resident calls after not hearing them for almost 50 years. S6 is one of the calls that all three pods make. On the spectrogram, it looks like an upside-down smile. The frequency ramps up, the whales hold the note for a beat, and then down it comes. It sounds like a call and the echo of a call. S9, another used by all three pods, is a 3-beat call. Slow, quick, quick, slow, quick, quick. Researchers call it the Figaro. K-pod's S16 call sounds like a seagull. It looks more or less flat on the spectrogram. There's a yearning to it, an asking, a waiting. It's like the call of a call and response. On my first listen to a recording of calls, I heard L-pod's S19 call. But what I really heard was a farmer whistling for his border collie, a dad getting his son's attention on the playing field. There was a crispness, a compactness to it. It was less like music and more like a slide whistle. It sounded like a call to action. Listening to the killer whale calls reminds me of listening to my baby's in utero heartbeats. Undoubtedly animate sounds, intimate sounds, ethereal sounds that are transmitted through a body and through a body of water. sounds that would remain unheard by us if not for some kind of instrument to convey the message from one realm to another. Sounds that stir rapture and imagination. In their world, sound is a necessity for life, what the killer whales use to survive, what they use to navigate, communicate, coordinate, echolocate. But they live in a noisy environment. Noise disturbance from ships and boats, things like propellers, shafts, gears, engines, drown out the killer whale calls, masks their clicks, makes it harder for the whales to find and catch Chinook. The noise from boats and ships reduces the killer whales' acoustic space. It reduces their world and reduces their chances of survival. There are 7 hydrophones installed throughout the Salish Sea. You can listen live to what's going on underwater. The first morning I logged on to the hydrophone network, I heard what sounded like running water, or a stream with an occasional splash or sploosh. I heard what sounded like feet trotting through muddy puddles, or swimming strokes catching the water. I heard the sea as it sounds when you put a conch shell to your ear. I heard snap, crackle, and pop, not unlike my breakfast of Rice Krispies as a kid. I heard static. Another time, I heard the steady thud and chug of boat propellers and diesel engines. As the revolutions thumped faster and louder, I felt my heart thumping louder and faster. When I checked the marine traffic website, I found details of the ships in transit near the different hydrophones. I found the ship name, the ship type, ship length, breadth, dead weight, destination, speed, flag, call sign, and photographs of the different vessels. I heard Washington State Ferry, Suquamish, underway at 14 knots, westbound mid-channel between Mukilteo and Clinton. I heard the tug Island Breeze just south of Point Robinson, destination Tacoma. I heard the container ship Everfair, northbound from Tacoma, underway at 20 knots, destination Kaohsiung, Taiwan. In the photo of that one, I saw on its deck multicolored containers stacked like matchboxes, 18 rows bow to stern, 8 stories high. I heard the oil tanker Steve Galata underway at 14 knots, destination Vancouver, British Columbia, from Esmeraldas, Ecuador. I heard the bulk carrier Ultra Leopard, destination Vancouver from Nantong, China. I heard a loud droning that I wanted to turn off right away. I heard buzzing as bothersome as a fly right in my face. I heard a monotonous hum. I did not hear quiet, and I did not hear killer whales. If they were there, I wondered, could they hear each other? Scott thinks about whale calls a lot. He thinks about the anatomy that produces the calls, how the calls came to be, what evolutionary forces selected them, how the whales learned them. He thinks about the potential they hold for research and what language they preserve from the past. He thinks about decibels and dimensions, sound waves and source levels. He thinks about frequencies and functions, clicks and kilohertz, recordings and repertoires. He thinks about the sound that propagates from the calls, the information contained within them, and the intention behind them. He thinks about the killer whale's behaviors, how they relate to the calls. The gathering of families and pods on cool summer evenings, the surface percussion of tail slaps and fin slaps, the coordinating of close-knit individuals on a foraging spree, the roaming of an adult male far from the others, and the beckoning of a mother to her calf on an autumn afternoon. He thinks about the wonder and awe of it all. How do the killer whales do what they do with sound? Do you know how hard it is to catch a Chinook? How the hell do they know to turn around when they get to California? How do they find their way to Haida Gwaii? But he also thinks about the likelihood of the southern residents going extinct. He thinks about ship strikes, acoustic trauma, and noise disturbance. He thinks about what it would mean to lose these whales, lose their voices, lose the complexity, the mystery, lose this symphony that takes center stage in the soundscape of the Salish Sea. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stacy Nathaniel Jackson. Thank you to Jackstra and Nisi. There are many writers I know and those who I aspire to be in community with who speak of channeling ancestor wisdom. I remember when I was 6, my father was 6'4", my grandmother, who was 4'4"-ish, they got into an argument that turned into a fight. And out of nowhere, Granny took a corkscrew can opener and went straight for his neck. This is my version of channeling ancestor wisdom. The content notes: warrior headhunters, anti-imperial resistance in Batuk, an indigenous Filipino tattoo practice. I told Nisi earlier that I was going to try to channel my inner LeVar Burton, so here we go. I'm going to close my eyes and take a deep breath. Let's begin. The dim. 1. Ganu squatted in silence. For village honor, he had taken another skull. On this day of acknowledgement, heads ready for blessing had been set inside plaited rattan, then lined along the ground. As part of the ritual, he waited for marks to be tapped into his body by a visiting Mama Batuk. It was the way, head-taking, the only way his people had staved off the Outsman. For centuries, the Outsman tried to dominate his people, siphon copper and gold, all the while attempting to banish the Great Spirit in the sky, forest, and rivers with their so-called one God. Just like his father's uncles and their fathers and uncles and cousins before him, his bloodline had fought with rocks, swords, shields, and the occasional crack of a head axe. And so it was. Blood lineage. Ganu looked up toward the Great Spirit. The weight made him restless. He focused on extending his breath, holding it. The ability to control his respiration had become just as important in hand-to-hand combat as wielding a head axe. Eventually, he was motioned into the batukuk by an assistant. The skin on Ganu's chest and biceps sagged from age. Prior to climbing the ladder into the hut, he said a prayer for peace, hoping his people would tire of fighting amongst themselves, and that the Outsman would tire of conquest. Regardless, the snake scales intended for his face would become a warning to Highlanders, Lowlanders, and sea dwellers alike. He should be feared. He was venomous. No doubt the Great Spirit listened to his plea for peace. Soon after his prayer, a monkey-eating eagle screeched. The raptor was a rarity in the highlands. To Ganu, the eagle was proof of the Great Spirit's protective presence. Pleased by the screech, he quickly took his position on the buttock floor as the mama buttock turned his back and prepared a mixture. Ganu closed his eyes. Ready. A sharpened thorn was burrowed inside him like a porcelain shard. Anyone else would have grimaced during the needle-like irritation, not Ganu. All he felt was dull pressure. The pain, dim. Blood seeped from his cheeks under the mallet as the mama buttock hand-tipped pigment into his face. Great care needed to be given, not so much for Ganu, but for the mama buttock. Commingling blood was a bad omen. Care and caution, synonymous. Carelessness with blood was disrespect. Another high-pitched screech, slightly different from the first. Ganu opened his eyes. Suddenly, a moment of uncomfortable recognition. Someone from his past was kneeling in front of him. Tayaban? A villager from his childhood, long gone to another province. No, not you. Too late. The seal of his skin had been broken with the tap of a mallet. When Ganu first entered the hut, he hadn't been focused on anything other than the solemnity of the ritual. Now all he could do was mumble to himself, Tayaban, you shouldn't be here. The mama buttock also appeared distracted, although not by Ganu, but by the other eagle flying above the damp forest pines. Together now, their wings were practically tip to tip, then talon to talon, a pair bond. Magnificent indeed. Instead of going back to tapping, the mama buttock sneezed, then stopped breathing. 2. Your mother say you got dim, your father say nothing. When he was young, the conversation his grandmother tried to have about the family condition, what they called the dim, made Ganu uncomfortable. Days earlier, he had grappled with a boy named Tayaban who drew blood to prove the improvable. Ganu and his family were half snake, half human. In Ganu's mind, being called half of anything was an invitation to fight. The accusation that his clan wasn't completely human was the equivalent of being called dirty, worthy of ridicule. Later, when the fight was over, Ganu was embarrassed to admit he had no awareness that Tayaban had bitten him, ripped his ear, then spit out a piece of loose flesh. At the time, Ganu had kept punching and kicking to the rhythm of barking dogs and kids laughing. Ganu and Tayaban had locked legs while grappling. Tighter, tight, hard, harder. Eventually, Tayaban went limp, struggling to breathe, he told his grandmother, while she drew pulls from her favorite smoke pipe. Next time, use rock better. Later, I show you how to use root. Ganu said nothing to her about the dim, what he felt or didn't feel. Within minutes, the jagged divot and annoying ooze congealed as if nothing had happened. The bite wound was completely healed. Rumors had always floated that Ganu's clan were descendants of dubious spirits. What did it matter, his parents said. Most kith and kin had a mix of benevolent and contestable ancestors in their lives. Who was anyone to judge? As a result of the ear incident, he began combat training with his father. Months passed. Honing the skill of spirit listening was the next step to fighting masterfully. Ganu's grandfather understood rock spirits better than anyone, his father assured him. It was settled. He was to go on a spirit trip in the forest. It was what Ganu's great-grandfather had arranged at this age with his own grandfather. And so it was. 3. Ganu and his grandfather set off down a muddy trail early in the morning toward the mouth of an old crater, despite heavy wind and rain on the horizon. During their journey, his grandfather explained that not all rocks were appropriate to pick and throw to neutralize threats. Asking rock spirits for permission guaranteed success. On their return that afternoon, wind and rain gathered into a tiny typhoon. Ganu and his grandfather huddled inside a makeshift shelter. White trees crackled and small rocks began to swirl. This is not for you to fear. Ganu assumed he meant the rage of the storm, until his grandfather took one of the rocks they had collected and slammed a sharp edge onto Ganu's hand. Bones and joints broke under force. Ganu felt nothing but confusion. So it's true. As the wind surged, his grandfather's gaze locked in on him. Ganu wanted to cry, but held back. Tears he was able to control. The rest of the body was the problem. Slowly, his dislocated fingers miraculously swiveled back into alignment. Broken skin self-retracted and was smooth again. Ganu tried to conceal his newfound regeneration behind his back. His grandfather swatted his shoulder in response. No, the spirit gift. You carry with pride, no disgrace. Suddenly, a surge of mud burrowed toward them, nearly overtaking them. But as muddy debris closed in, Ganu's grandfather raised his hands. The sludge slowed, then split into 2 paths around their shelter, sparing Ganu and his grandfather from a premature burial. Earthrock summoning my spirit gift. You more snake, but you need spirit gift control. We work on this when we return. 4. Blood bubbled like raindrops on Ganu's brown cheeks. He wasn't certain. Taliban? What if it was? What if it wasn't? Too late, though. His thoughts, the way he had watched his grandfather in the forest redirect a mudslide, had already been released. This time, no rock spirits, but a tainted exhale, venomous enzymes aerosolized. Over his 100 years, Ganu had learned to stop the hearts of his adversaries by weaponizing his breath. Quite helpful in the defeat of the Outsman. His grandfather had taught him well. Adaptation ensured survival. As a teen, he had considered revenge. Revenge for what? An ear? The truth? Ganu never tired of the highlands, their unconstrained beauty. His children, and by extension their children's children, had left his highland village for the lowlands, maybe beyond. Others in his clan, wife, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, longer gone. And so it was for Taliban now. As the eagle pair Ganu had summoned with prayer continued to soar above the Ptakuk, he broke Taliban's fall. Taliban, maybe not Taliban, defenseless against human venom, collapsed into his chest. The Ptak mallet and thorn hit the ground. Best to be cautious with revenge. On the other hand, best to dispense with doubt. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Nisi, my cohort, and everyone at Jack Straw. It's been a great honor and a pleasure to hear everybody's work. So yeah, as Nisi mentioned, I'm going to be reading from my speculative fiction novel called The Godspore King. Might take a little LeVar Burton breath, too. I tracked little Nikolai up the road and through the woods, following the blood trail. It was still early morning, so the stinging nettles, huckleberries, and the curved heads of the fiddle ferns were all dotted with dew, which sparkled with the light of the rising sun. Little Nikolai had been kneeling next to the young coyote, petting its furry head, when Anthony Harkin shot it in the chest. No warning or anything. Apparently, little Nikolai had found the pup hiding in some bushes separated from its family, probably freaking out because of all the gunshots. I don't know. Animals also seemed weirdly attracted to him. The coyote was skinny, the runt. Little Nikolai didn't scream when it happened, but he was clearly pretty upset. His tiny hands kept shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wild. While my fellow youth leaders and I were helping our instructor deal with Anthony Harkin, little Nikolai ran off with a dead coyote in his arms. I was worried about him. All the other campers were messed up too, of course, but he was such a strange kid already. I was scared that this might push him to some new extreme. Truthfully, though, as I followed him farther into the woods, I was also feeling a little glow of hope inside my heart. The bully Anthony Harkin, the scourge of Camp Covenant, had finally gone too far. He had started to make a joke about he was just protecting us, when Sister Bangor, our supremely jacked marksmanship instructor, tackled him to the ground. When he tried to resist, she arm-locked him with brutal efficiency, grinding his face into the gravel, wrenching back his arm. Everyone in our urban warfare class had watched him squeal and cry. It is wrong to delight in the suffering of others, I know. But oh, it was wonderful. I was not so naive as to think that Anthony would get the lash, the stocks, or the hole like he deserved, given his special status as the snotty heir to the billionaire Harkin family that funded Camp Covenant, but I thought that he'd at least be expelled in disgrace, maybe with some light corporal punishment. His breach of firearm protocol broke at least 3 of the central tenets of our camp code of conduct, which was written by the true patriarch himself. Shooting baby animals was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a very good way of embodying the virtues of courtesy and common sense. I thought we were finally rid of him. This was the limit of my childish understanding at this time. I still believed that God would punish the wicked for us, not that God would inspire and require the righteous to do the punishing in his name. The path went deeper and deeper into the forest, twisting and turning, some sort of game trail. I'd never explored the full grounds of Camp Covenant. Our outer walls snaked all the way towards the base of the Olympic Mountains. I found myself imagining that the path would never end, leading out past our towering walls and up towards the vast snowy mountains. But at last, I found little Nikolai in a mossy clearing. He was kneeling between 2 huge snaking roots of a giant Douglas fir tree. The sun lit up the mist around us with beams of slanted, glowing light. I approached slowly, not wanting to spook him, but he didn't move. I sat down next to him and patted his shoulder. I didn't know what to say. Before him was some sort of savage altar. The dead coyote was tucked between his legs, curled like a sleeping cat. But in front of him, there was a dead crow with wings outstretched on a bed of moss. This dead crow was encircled by all sorts of weird baubles, neon beaded friendship bracelets, tiny reed baskets, and woven dream catchers. These I recognized from our arts and crafts projects, but there were also coins, bones, flowers, seashells, and smooth river stones too, all meticulously arranged. At the top of the crow's head and at each wingtip stood a little cluster of birthday candles, each candle burning a tiny flame. I knew I should chastise him for this verboten paganism, but I did not have the heart. You okay, buddy? Little Nikolai shook his head. Just so you know, Anthony will get what's coming to him, I said. He'll be punished for sure, and he'll be expelled from camp. You won't have to worry about him anymore. Little Nikolai looked up at me, his eyes twin worlds of pain. He was cradling the head of the dead coyote with his bloody hands. Why would he do this? Little Nikolai said. Why? I don't know. I'm sorry. Up to this point, Anthony Harkin's other cruelties had been fairly normal. Pee in a sleeping bag, spit in orange juice, etc. But this was different, dangerous. Little Nikolai reached over and petted the feathers of the dead crow's head, and he bowed his head again. I saw his lips move, muttering some soundless prayer. I looked closer at the crow. Its beautiful, glossy black beak was angled to one side like it was sitting for a portrait, a most regal pose. There was also some sort of fungus growing out of where its eye had been, little golden shoots probing upwards. There were little dots of this fungus on the roots of the fir tree, too. This was my first sight of the bloom, the thing that would change all our lives forever, the thing that would redeem the world. Little Nikolai clasped his hands and bowed his head to the altar. He arranged the dead coyote at the feet of the dead crow in a peaceful pose, crossing its arms across its chest. He placed a freshly picked dandelion behind its ear. I sensed movement. On a branch far above, there were 5 crows watching us. I found myself wondering what it was like to be a crow, what little Nikolai and I looked like from so far above, how the world appeared through their eyes, their crow world. Little Nikolai shifted beside me. He bowed to the crows like honored guests. Look, I said, even the crows came to the funeral. I said it as a joke, but he looked at me like I was an idiot, as if this was perfectly obvious. None of it makes sense, he said. Why do people have to die? Why do animals have to die? I thought of my mother, of her bravery and humor, even as the brittle bones of her vertebrae kept fracturing like eggshells, one after the other. I thought of the doctor visits, the no-nonsense tone of the surgeon as he explained why carpentry solutions would not work for this level of osteoporosis, saying it was like drilling screws into drywall and then hanging massive paintings onto them. The way the wall just crumbles. I don't know, I said. I knew that we would be reunited with our loved ones in death if we lived righteously, but I still did not understand why we had to suffer so much. And I didn't understand why animals were not more important to our faith. The true patriarch claimed that animals had no souls, not lesser souls, none. And this felt wrong, like a ball of thorns that I could not swallow. Little Nikolai reached over and took my hand. His hand was bloody, cold, and small, but it felt good to hold on to it anyways. I do know one thing, though, I said. I know that we can fight to make sure that the deaths of our loved ones are not in vain, and that applies to animals too. We can fight to defeat evil and to stomp on the wicked until they are crushed beneath our boots and the world is cleansed. This seemed to cheer him up considerably. He smiled wide. He squeezed my hand. "You are right," he said. "We are the Davids. Watch out, Goliath." I laughed. Little did I know how serious he was and how many people we would have to kill to spread the glorious spores of God. Together, we prayed, but as I prayed, I kept peeking at the savage altar before me. I found myself thinking verboten thoughts. Father K had told me about pagan rituals of the Tibetans who left bodies out for the birds to eat. He said that Westerners called this sky burial, but they simply called it carrying to the mountain. It was wrong, of course, ungodly, but I also thought there was something beautiful about it. This way, the bodies of our loved ones would not lie alone in dark coffins beneath the dirt forever, while we were forced to pretend that they were sleeping, putting stupid pillows beneath their lifeless heads. No, this felt far more honest. This way, their bodies would at least become a part of the wild creatures that soar above us, shooting through the sky, darting through mountain passes, far above all human misery, free and flying like angels. Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone. Wonderful job. Thank you again, Nisi. And we'll be seeing you again throughout the year. So please keep in touch, follow us in all the places, and come say hi. Thank you very much. Have a great night, everybody.